Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name's Josh Hodges. I'm the host of Online with an Architect. Very excited to have Sazzala Reddy from VMware with us today. Welcome, Sazzala.
Hey, happy to see you, man.
Fantastic. So we did try and record this the other day and had some life issues that we had to attend to, but really glad to have you on again. So let's jump straight in. Maybe you can give people a bit of an intro about yourself and a bit of your career history.
Yep, cool. So I've been in Silicon Valley for the last, I would say 20 years. And I've been at six different startups. And my last startup was acquired by VMware. It was called Datrium. And I've done database startups, I've done networking startups, and but more last three ones have been storage startups, storage companies. And probably the most popular one is Data Domain. And Data Domain was the idea was Data Domain was to actually kind of solve the tape problem. Like tape was horrible to use. And then we said, okay, how do we make disk cheaper than tape, to be at least competitive, right? And so we invented something like dedupe was there. Those are the topics. Data Domain did really well in dedupe. And in fact, our stock symbol was also dedupe. So the journey for Data Domain was that we our story was to kill tape. And we did a successful job at that and kind of built a really very, very optimized storage system for backups. It was great business. It was very good, very fast. Dedupe was really still the best, I think, probably. But I think what happened was that at the end, when I was leaving, data became so much bigger and bigger that it's easy to back up. We solved that problem, but recovery started becoming a problem. Because at that scale, a petabyte scale, petabytes, how do you recover fast? And so I left Data Domain to in between, I did something else. And then I started a company called Datrium with my other colleagues. The idea was that how do you focus on recovery? That's what we wanted to solve. Backup is easy, but ultimately recovery is what really matters. So we started focusing on innovations in that space. And ultimately, at the end of during the halfway in the journey of Datrium, we had a cloud product, and we focused on recovery in the cloud. And it just give an easy way to people to do disaster recovery in the cloud or to do ransomware recovery in the cloud. And we were working very closely with VMware Cloud Services as well. So VMware saw the opportunity. It was a great synergy. They bought us, and now I'm at VMware for the last 3 years, and I'm the CTO for cloud storage and data. We're excited to be here as well.
Yeah, no, fantastic position. I think lots of innovation in the space, and obviously your role and your team is critical to what's going on with all the multi-cloud offerings and things like that. So maybe let's dive into the foundation of the multi-cloud offerings, which is really vSAN. So vSAN's been around for quite a long time now. And now we've got vSAN 8 with the Express Storage Architecture. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on ESA?
Yes. So firstly, let's just look at the history of where vSAN comes from. Why did VMware have to do this? So the hypothesis vision for VMware long ago was that software-defined data center, right? That's kind of the vision what VMware is trying to get to. And storage is always like the last child, which is still very hardware-centric kind of thing. So, they wanted to do, so I think that's what they wanted to do, sort of software-defined. I think they kind of changed the game in the industry a little bit, right? Like Nutanix did also. So software-defined data center is what they were aiming for. And to do that, I think vSAN was the kind of next evolution for it. Hey, how do we make compute and storage kind of work together in a nice way with a software-defined architecture? And also, that was number one goal. Number two, also goal was to make it hybrid. Because see, those days, back in 10 years ago, disks were still cost-effectively, much cheaper than Flash was. So you had to design architecture mostly for making it work on hybrid storage, because you can have some Flash, but mostly disk. Mm-hmm. And that was the kind of architecture. This is 10 years ago, right? Maybe a little bit more than that. And over time, a couple of things happened in the last few years, especially during the last, I would say 3-4 years, right? One is that Flash kind of started becoming everywhere. And even the team saw that all vSAN deployments are happening in Flash. Mm-hmm. And hybrid was going away slowly. And the second thing is that people started expecting that VMware should also solve the HCI problem. HCI problem, what I mean is that HCI is the idea is to make it all easy, software-defined data center. But in implementation-wise, the way I think OSA was designed was we'll have the computer storage together. It works really well in many, many use cases, but in actually a lot of other use cases doesn't work that well, because people want compute and storage to be kind of separately scalable. Because not every workload matches that HCI model, that convergence model, right? Mm. So then to do all these things, and also like, it's not enough to just build a storage system. It's just a dumb box. Like, you don't want that. You want to add data has a life cycle to follow through. And the life cycle generally involves snapshots, fundamental building block. And then because you want to do snapshots for recovery, for doing compliance, and for doing ransomware recovery, for doing DR, replication, backup, archiving, all of it. And those are the foundation. And then if you look at the history of storage, generally file systems in the business, if you don't have snapshots built in from beginning, it's a little hard to do later. Mm-hmm. So the team kind of during COVID kind of sat down and said, okay, we're going to build a kind of a new layer in the vSAN architecture. And it's a new layer. It's kind of based on the foundation called log structure file system. Mendel, the founder of VMware, had a paper like 992. It's a very good foundational paper for a lot of file systems in the world today. And so VMware kind of took that ideas and kind of made it into a distributed file system layer, which can actually now, that layer can now basically, it can work on any device, flash, hard drives, QLC, TLC. It's a much more elegant way of doing things, or even object storage, S3 one day, right? So it's a very elegant way of doing the storage architecture, and that allowed us to first of all have snapshots fundamentally built into the file system, and scaling performance was not a problem. We fixed all the other 10 years of experience the team had, like all the issues, right? You've written some blogs about them as well. So all the issues, all the like learnings they had, they put it into this new ideas, and they actually succeeded in doing that. And that also allowed us to also like say, look, customers also want disaggregated storage. That doesn't mean it's not HCI. HCI is again the conceptual idea that it's integrated together. And so we're also offering, along with HCI, customers can choose now, hey, I also want disaggregated HCI because I have a large amount of data, 10 petabytes. Okay, here, you can do this way also. So that's kind of the evolution of how we kind of this team has come together with these ideas. And the next evolution after this, and we did a tech preview at Explore, is we're going to expose snapshots in a kind of new way. And that's next building block to actually then start looking at data management, the whole of it.
Yeah, fantastic. I think HCI as well, people looked at HCI over the last 10 years to try and make things easier for them. So, I think HCI has made things easier. And I think some of these innovations make the architecture easier, of course. ESA, you don't have to deal with disk groups, and you don't have to work out how many, flash to capacity drives and things like that. And simply the resilience of the platform as well. So there's a blog I recommend everyone read from Pete Collar, who's a technical marketing architect at VMware. And the thing I really like about this, which I'll put a link up, is Pete highlights a scenario where you've got OSA versus ESA, and you've got the same failure scenario, a hardware failure. And ESA, due to the way it's architected, is roughly 10 times faster to restore resiliency than OSA, just due to its new architecture. So that's something behind the scenes that people might not see, but it's a huge value because you don't have that double disk failure scenario or extended periods of degradation and things like that. So I'll definitely put that link up because I think it's a really good example of one of the things I've been critical of in the past is failure scenarios. And that's you can't get much better than that. So very impressive.
Again, like I said, 10 years of experience, sometimes you learn something from it. And then you kind of say, okay, look, I've learned all these things, all the issues. So sometimes, at 1.0, you got to take a shot. You got, HCI is a new model. You take a shot at it. And then now it's like, okay, experiences happen and build a new file system. By the way, I'll make another observation. If you look at most storage companies, I've never seen a company build a new file system from scratch. It's not easy. Like, look at any of the big companies, they buy companies. They never build something from scratch like that. It's very hard. So I think this team, I'm very excited with this team. Like they actually did something, it's not easy to accomplish, especially distributed file system. You can do 1.0, that's great, but having a new thing to do, that's actually pretty hard to do. Because there's so many, it's not just technical issues, it's also like, political issue. Like political, I say political, like, there's like, okay, we got to set aside so many people to work on this. What do we justify this investment? It'll take 2-3 years. Storage system don't build overnight like that. It takes 2-3 years and all that kind of thing. So you have to think through all of these things, and the team pulled it off. Kudos to them.
Yeah, I think ESA really reminds me of what Tesla did, which is going vision only with their autopilot and full self-driving. I think that's a very difficult decision. It's a very, a long-term investment, but it's obviously paying off for Tesla, and I think ESA has clearly paid off for VMware. So right. I think it's the right thing to do.
And also, generally vSAN has like exabyte scale customers. Like, the customers who deployed vSAN at exabyte scale. That shows the resiliency of the just overall platform. So not everything is changed in vSAN. Some layer of like how the layout is done is changed, but still the foundations are all still there. Like some of the core concrete pieces, like the resiliency, the enterprise class features.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for those listening, we're going to put up a screenshot of this, but it highlights the 5 different ways we can deploy ESA. So we've got a standard HCI ESA cluster, which is what everyone's familiar with. Looks the same as OSA in that regard. Then, of course, you can do the stretched cluster version of that. The compute-only cluster, which is that disaggregation part that you started to refer to. And then the vSAN Max cluster, which is the storage-only piece, and of course the stretched version of that as well. So quite a few different deployment types. Maybe let's talk about the use case for the compute cluster and separating out compute from the storage layer.
Yeah. So there are multiple things happening in the industry today, like also different use cases. So let's talk about one of the use cases we see in the customers right now. A lot of people trying to build modern applications, and modern applications are very agile. They kind of like want like scaling instantaneously. It's much more flexible architecture. It's much more things come and go all the time, right? And so, for example, we have a customer who's doing Elasticsearch. They have 200 petabytes of Elasticsearch. That's like a lot of data, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the workloads we are seeing more and more. And for that, you need an infrastructure which is more flexible. You need storage to be independently scalable of compute, because they no longer fit that model of like that very, very cookie cutter kind of thing. You want that flexibility and agility, like the cloud, like native cloud, right? You want agility and stuff like that. And that's what we are seeing. Customers are pushing us to kind of solve those problems. That kind of was one of the main use cases for us. Second use case is that, ultimately, when we do want to do replication and provide a repository for people do many-to-one replication, all that stuff, it tends to be consolidative, right? You may have many silos of primary storage, but when you do a disaster recovery, kind of ransomware recovery, or a cyber recovery vault kind of thing, it tends to be larger in some place, and that requires again no compute. It only requires storage, less compute. And so that's, I think, another use case where we see that, okay, a lot of people asking us to do this. They're like, please provide us this giant repository of data. And to do that, you need the disaggregation of storage. And so there are such use cases are propelling us to kind of just accept it. And here's what customers want. And here's what we deliver for them.
Oh, I definitely think flexibility is key. I remember in the early days of HCI, there was one node type, and that was it. So you wanted to scale, there's your node, and you would scale. And yeah, you would get this mismatch of CPU and storage and performance and all these things, and licensing became inefficient and stuff like that. So I think having different deployment types certainly help. I think the storage-only one is quite exciting, actually. I've been quite a champion of scaling HCI in a storage-only manner for a long time, increasing performance and capacity and the flexibility. So I think this one's quite interesting. In fact, I think when we talk about multi-cloud later, I think this might be something that's coming, I speculate, down the road.
Yep.
That it'll be a big part of the multi-cloud world where people have these vSAN Max clusters doing storage only, storing their data efficiently, and then they can scale up the compute piece, when they burst for DR or for whatever reason. Yep. So I think there's a lot of good use cases here that from an architect's perspective, I'm very excited to explore them and test them and blog about them. So yeah, you'll definitely see more from me on this.
Okay, cool. And then the other thing I mentioned about the layer, that log-structure file system, it is built to kind of, it works really well with any device. So for example, there could be object storage below it, and it'll basically do tiering nicely, like it'll work fine. Or you can put hard drives, it'll work fine. So I think it enables many more use cases also, because sometimes people, when they have 10 petabytes, 20 petabytes, they may expect it to be a little bit more cheaper. So they want like large repository, maybe object storage kind of interface, kind of things like that. So that kind of gives us the flexibility to kind of adjust cost also in terms of flexibility. It's not just deployment type, but also the cost structure. And the other one more thing VMware has, vSAN Max has done now, which is a change, which is that it's not charged by cores. The storage-only clusters are charged by terabyte. It's a kind of different model, because customers want that model. Like, again, it's not about us, it's about customers, what they want, and we're solving that.
Yeah, actually, licensing is a really good point. So I think, in the past, what I've seen, I think I've written a blog about this actually, but I've seen licensing models which discourages you to do the right thing from an architectural perspective.
Yep.
And that really frustrated me, because I would make a recommendation to a customer, mission critical environment, here's how I would recommend you do things and why. And then the account team would come back and say, Josh, but that's 20%, 50%, whatever it is, more expensive because of this, this, and this. And I would go to like product teams and say, why are we discouraging good behavior? Like, it should be the opposite. It should be, if you're doing things correctly, we should reward the customer. So I think it's not only a technology discussion, it's also that commercial side that need to align for these solutions to really have all their value. So that's really good to hear that it's just on capacity, because I guess what springs to mind straight away is if you charge on capacity, the customer can choose to have more nodes to get better performance if they want, or they can choose to have bigger nodes if they don't need the performance.
Yep. And the other thing in this in the storage business is that if you look at traditional storage, generally, like, it's a dual controller architecture, and the challenge with that has across time has been that it's a bottleneck. That one controller is like another bottleneck performance. So you can keep adding more shelves to it, more capacity, but you can never. There's a limit to how much performance you can scale with this architecture, right? So you can put 10 petabytes behind one tiny head, and then you get what you get. And so the reason you're putting more storage is because sometimes you have more workloads, and more workloads means more performance needed. So I think there's a limitation to fundamentally that thing. So this scale-out architecture generally, like, it's not about vSAN generally. A scale architecture like this gives you this elasticity you need. It's flexible, you can keep adding things. And also when you add nodes, not only do you get capacity, you also get performance, because you need the performance. You can't just just add capacity and not expect some extra things happening in the system, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, within the storage on the clusters, we also have a hypervisor running, right? We don't show it; it's not visible, but it enables us to do other future things in the future. For example, if you want to do some cleansing, you want to do compliance, like some PII stuff. So we have an opportunity to kind of make it into a more active storage system, as opposed to just being a dumb box,
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's two key points here. So, when you have a traditional, array, 2-controller SAN, I used to always say to customers, when you put storage on that, you're just dividing the performance further between all that capacity.
Yep.
And sometimes you see the light bulb come on for people. They go, oh, I had a disk shelf. I thought I had more capacity and more performance because I'm adding more disk. Well, yes, you've got more disk and more potential performance, but unless you fix that controller, then if you're saturated at that layer, you're not going to get anywhere. So, I remember many conversations over the years about that. So I'm glad we're in alignment on that one.
These days, if you look at one flash device, can do more IOPS than the entire array can do. So adding more shelves is not going to give you more performance. The bottleneck is the CPU.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key thing that everyone needs to understand. When you're processing I/O, the CPU or whatever's driving it is the bottleneck. It's no longer the drive. It's not even close to the drive anymore.
Yeah, like a single drive can drive your entire array performance. Like a single drive, like you can do 1 million IOPS, right? I mean, that's massive. And also the other thing is this: can you change architecture once you have such a design? It's actually very hard. Storage systems don't change like that. Storage system is like a database schema. Once you have a schema, you can't change a schema because you put a lot of data in it. So same thing with storage systems is that it's very, very hard to change architecture once you have something. So and then to go from a single architecture to like a multi-node cluster, it's not a trivial thing to do. That's why it's very kind of not very common to find distributed file systems like generally on-prem. Like in the cloud, yes, that's a different model, but generally it's very hard to do some of these things. There's a lot of work, a lot of extra things to consider, all these failure scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the architecture, the conceptual design, this is what I always say as well, architecturally, if the conceptual design is flawed, the physical implementation is only going to get worse. So here, you've taken the hard road, log structured filed system, hard to do, but it's the right approach, which means when you go through that logical and physical layer, you can actually deploy the solution you expect.
Yep.
And you're not constrained by that conceptual layer. So yeah, hard road to take. Like you said, it was 3 years. It was during COVID. Sounds like a very good use of that difficult time. And now you're enjoying the fruits of your labor.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was a very awesome investment.
Very cool. So we've touched on the compute clusters and the traditional HCI. Tell me a bit about stretched. How has that improved with ESA, and what does that look like for customers?
I think overall with ESA, because of the new file system layout, performance has become more stable. Like it's a much more predictable performance because it's a log, writing a log, right? There's no lumpiness. There's no like a read, modify, write kind of problems. So the performance is way better than before. In fact, customers telling us also, like, it's not just our own numbers, like, it's also customers like, hey, I put this in, this is like my suddenly performance has gone up a lot. And then it helps you do better everything. Like, when you have more performance, it helps you like do such cluster, but because you have a lower latency overhead, right? When you replicate other side, because if acknowledge from the other side saying, hey, I wrote data there. If there's less overhead there and it's much more faster, you get to like less lumpiness, less glitches, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Most of the stretch cluster environments I've seen over the years, obviously you're constrained by the latency between sites. But yeah, people don't consider that the quicker you can write data on both sides, the less overhead there is. And stretch cluster, of course, everything's to do with the latency of that data traversing that link and coming back. So the quicker we write it and acknowledge it, the better those solutions can be.
And so it's not just wire transfer, it's also the other side has to say, I wrote it, right?
Yeah.
So that if it doesn't work well, it has issues. If you're doing read modify writes, with the decode, and then that actually causes glitches. It causes like ups and downs in your latency spikes. So this actually provides us a much more smoother curve overall.
Absolutely. And to go a little deeper on that, imagine we've got two sites and we've got a drive failure on one site. That can impact the replication and that acknowledgement, because over here is degraded. Site 2 might be degraded. So site 1 is simply waiting on the bottleneck at site 2 to acknowledge. So the point we made earlier about the rebuilds and the failure scenarios being recovered around 10 times quicker now with ESA, it means that even in those scenarios where you've got a drive or an issue at another site, it's less of a problem. It's 10 times quicker to resolve itself and get back to business as usual. All of these steps actually add up and make a huge difference when it comes to day 2 operations. It's not just that benchmark day 1 that we all love to run, IO meter. Everyone loves IO meter and crystal disk mark, but it's actually what happens in the real world during ops.
And also, it's customer satisfaction, number 1. And number 2 is that they don't call support and say something is going on. So it's basically happiness for everybody in this situation.
Yeah, I always say this actually. If you engage a good architect who chooses the right product for the right problem, then you're going to have a better outcome, because you won't be, having interoperability issues, or you won't have product misfits or anything like that. So I think, again, like with ESA, you're ticking all the boxes. So yeah, it's a big rewrite. Obviously, I was critical of a lot of things in OSA, and I stand by those things. But ESA has definitely, I think you might have gone through my blog and ticked them all off, actually, just to yeah.
Some probably was a little hyperbolic, okay, just being honest about it, because I was watching from outside also, and some probably true. Like every product has some goods and bads, and you compromise. So by the way, nothing is perfect. You have to compromise on some things. And storage, especially, is like one of those things. You compromise on a few things, and you kind of make those calls.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think it's been really good. I've been watching the development and all the announcements, and yeah, I'm quite impressed with the product and testing it as well. It's very easy to use. One thing I was going to ask you about, actually, which I quite like, is there's a bit of a shift, it seems, with ESA, focusing more on vSAN ready nodes and sort of guaranteeing that architecture or the hardware is supported, which I quite like. I think appliances are a really good way to go for customers. Was that a deliberate decision, or was this simply just, obviously vSAN 8's not been out for a huge amount of time? Is that more just of a support thing until we...
Yeah, I think it's mostly that. I think the latter. I think it's just that, sometimes when you ship a kind of a new product, you have to kind of consider narrowing down the scope of like how many things can go wrong, right? And I think there's more confidence now. It looks also like we do require these flash drives in a certain way. Like we want some reducing of the risk factors. So at least nothing. It's not a problem, anything like that. It's just that it just reduces the initial kind of like how many things can you like really focus on. So, and there's more confidence now. Like okay, it's working. So we will definitely expand. Or it's already expanding like the supported kind of hardware configurations.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, certainly for many years, when customers have a failure, I would say probably 80% of the time customers have problems. It's because they've built something bespoke. And something bespoke is much harder to test and validate and things like that. So, having a reduced HCL, I personally see as an advantage. It's something that, Nutanix did in the early days as well. It guarantees that customer outcome. So anyone thinking this is a bad thing, I think it's a great thing, because move to a new architecture, make sure it's absolutely bulletproof, and then expand that over time is the exact approach that I would recommend.
So I'll tell you what happens is, like, so first of all, many things. So over time, like especially enterprise customers, right? You'll end up with people who have 5 years old stuff still running on the part. So you can't not support it. So over time, what happens is that you end up having a little bit more expansion of your support matrix, of your hardware matrix, number one. And secondly, look, software-defined architecture, what's the value of it? One of them is you can move agile first, and then also you can take advantage of the latest innovations in CPU. You can get that. So that's also another factor, which what happens is that every 6 months Intel has something new, and then there's going to be supported. So that also is pushing that matrix to be wider. And which is, by the way, in a traditional, the architecture of this storage controller architecture, their CPUs are maybe 5 years, 3 years, whatever old, and then they are never on the latest stuff because it's just hard to refresh like that. But in this software-defined data center space, they refresh hardware all the time with new stuff. So that naturally, from a business perspective, I think you have to consider this little bit broader support matrix, and that is the nature of the beast.
Yeah, true. I mean, HCI, one of the benefits is that you can scale over time and add nodes, things like that, and obviously benefit from that hardware innovation, from Intel or AMD or whoever. So, that's obviously a value, and supporting that on the HCL is important over time. So I think you're right. The HCL just grows, over time naturally with hardware innovations as well.
That to me also is one of the value propositions. So restricting it to only small things, actually, is detrimental long term. Temporarily, it's okay. Like temporarily, you're making a short list, and then as you grow, you have to expand your kind of capabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, once you have more experience in the field and more data to go off and reliability stats and things like that, then you know what you should support. And sometimes, reliability stats tell you that this device should not be supported because it's unreliable. And I think that's the other thing is if you get enough data in your support organization to say that something is unreliable, it's actually good to pull it off the HCL. Despite there'll be some customers that might be impacted, it's a good way to go, I think. So no one else has that problem.
Across time, that's one issue for sure across time in any storage business. And there's the drivers, software drivers, which talk to the devices. Like that's actually another piece of kind of in between thing, which sometimes causes hiccups. So there is that qualification as well.
Yeah, actually, on that exact topic, I had a really interesting discussion with another VCDX, Stanimir Markov. I don't know if you know Stanimir, but so he runs a company called Runecast. So I'm not trying to plug them too much, but he showed me a demo of one of their products. And one of the focuses of that tool is it checks the interoperability on the HCL of the drivers and the firmwares and all the different components. And I really like this feature, actually. So I'm looking forward to testing it. It basically does a simulation of an upgrade. And it says, okay, if you were to upgrade from version X to version Y, here are all the things you need to make sure that you fix. And then it would say the driver needs to be updated. And then there's a little link where it goes, you can click on that link. It'll tell you the VMware KB that's applicable, or the HCL link, which is applicable. And it'll tell you the right version that you need for the version of, say, ESX that you're upgrading to. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. If I had that for my whole career, that would have saved me a whole bunch of time.
Fair enough. Also, I think some of the VMware partners also have done a good job at this. Like, for example, VxRail from EMC, they do a good job of managing hardware because I think that's one of their value propositions for the system they sell, VxRail.
Yeah, absolutely. I think VxRail is a great example of they're trying to provide an outcome rather than just a product, and that's something that as an architect over time you realize that you're less of a technical architect and you're more of a business architect. Because that business outcome is the most important piece. So, it's not just about all the bells and whistles and the buttons we like to push and play with. It's actually just what's the best way to get that outcome, even if it means my job as, say, a sysadmin is a bit less interesting because it's a bit more automated and stuff like that. So one thing I want to circle back to, because it's a really high value, I think, is the cross-cluster capacity sharing capabilities. Because this, to me, I've seen it in the past. You have, whether it's a SAN or whether it's HCI, you've got available capacity somewhere, but you can't use it because it's in a different zone to something else or a different cluster. So Can you tell us a bit about that and what drove VMware to solve that problem?
Yeah, so HCI, again, the convergent model with compute storage together, ends up with a problem where you may end up with strands of empty space everywhere, right? And that so the engineering team said, okay, look, let's kind of figure out a solution to actually make this work well. There's a lot of space everywhere. If you have about like 20 clusters, there's like a little bit everywhere, right? And then, so how do we make this into a global kind of way of managing the storage? So the team kind of invented this something called HCI mesh, which kind of you can just say, okay, look, there's a remote storage there. Can I use that? Right, and put it part of my pool. So that's kind of what enabled that. It was like, it's pretty cool technology, by the way. Nobody else has this kind of stuff, right? It's not an easy thing to do. And so they built this. It's called HCI mesh. It's out in the market for I think for a little while. And but the challenge with it, I think it's a great technology for foundationally, but the problem people are trying to solve with that a little bit is what's HCI trying to kind of create the problem, right? Because computer storage aggregation. So if you disaggregate, that problem is less applicable, because now you actually can do disaggregation and you don't have these pockets of like unused space everywhere, right? This much more solves the problem fundamentally. But there may be other use cases of HCI mesh in the future. Can't talk about it too much now, but there may be other use cases we'll showcase later in the future. But there are people who use HCI mesh, but there are a lot more people who want disaggregation storage generally.
Yeah, I would say the whole mesh topology is a great capability, and you're right, it is unique in the market, and it's very cool and difficult to do. So kudos for putting in the time.
Yeah, I think the engineering team. I was surprised when I first heard of them. Like, wow, this is pretty technology is not easy to build, and these guys built it. Yeah. But again, the use case is important. So I think we have other use cases in mind in the future, because it doesn't come to people's mind automatically that I got to buy HCI mesh. That it doesn't come. It's not a thing people generally think about because it's not available to everybody else, right? Nobody else offers this feature, so people are not aware of this. So a lot of marketing has to be done to push this. So it's not easy to sell. By the way, you know this stuff. It's not easy to sell a new feature because you have to do a lot of marketing on it. People do not know about this stuff. So, but what do people do want is a use case. Hey, I want disaggregation. Okay, so we said, okay, look, let's use HCI mesh technology and make it disaggregated storage. Just simple. Right. So basically, it's better to like have maybe, okay, we have technology HCI mesh, but better to also like focus on like particular use cases and kind of go after that and kind of narrow down kind of make it a little bit more focused on those solutions.
Yeah, I think the mesh topology is actually probably the middle step, or the hop, step, and the jump approach. The HCI mesh might be in the middle, and disaggregation is really the nirvana where you want to end up potentially. So I think customers are going to be in a situation potentially prior to the disaggregation piece being supported. So they've put in mesh, it's solved their problem, and now you've got a better solution, and that enables them to migrate all the way there without re-architecting. So I think it's fantastic to have those options.
Yeah.
In my career, I've seen lots of sort of interim solutions where, you're mounting storage externally from HCI and you're doing all sorts of things.
Exactly.
They're to solve problems that ideally wouldn't be there in the first place, or they're to solve limitations of prior versions of software and things like that. So to have the option is fantastic, and to have an option which you could potentially just leave in place is also great. And then to have a choice to go the disaggregated route, is fantastic. I think architecturally, a lot of large customers are going to have plenty of good options to choose. So I'm looking forward to some large-scale ESA deployments, that's for sure.
We're already seeing large-scale deployments because we get telemetry and customers tell us, so we're already seeing large-scale deployments in ESA. I mean, for a new product, it's done really well. I mean, touch wood. It's pretty stable. Performance is very high. And we're seeing large deployments. So I think it's a good signs for people like it, people want it. So there's a demand, and we're servicing it. So.
Yeah.
And HCI mesh may have other use cases. We are noodling on them. We'll share more in the future.
I can already think of a bunch, so we don't have to go through them, but I can probably speculate what you're going to be looking at. But hopefully you surprise me with some new stuff that I haven't thought of. Because, working in the engineering team in the past, I was constantly thinking about, how can we solve things better, and what can we do that's different, and, the different scenarios customers come up with, and, corner use cases and stuff like that. I used to love whiteboarding out, different scenarios and what if we could do, this or that. So, I look forward to breaking some news with you one day on this podcast. So, well, let's continue down and just talk in general. So we've got all these multi-cloud solutions, from Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Oracle. I've had guests on the podcast who've covered those off, so we don't need to go through each of the offerings. But vSAN really is the foundation to all of those. And those offerings don't work and don't have their value, which is that portability and scalability, without vSAN. So I think that puts you in a very good position, right? Because you're creating this new evolved product with ESA that's going to further evolve these offerings and the value of those offerings. So effectively, you've got these major hyperscalers championing your technology. So I think in your position, that must feel really good, just before we go to a technical point, that people are wanting to use your technology and it's enabling all these great solutions.
I think we have good partners with Google and Azure and Amazon. They're really good partners because they see the value. They see the customers want it. They're also very receptive to the customer. Customers they sometimes do want that. They want VMware. They want it to be everywhere. So we're seeing a lot of traction on that as well. And you're correct. Storage is a good. You need the two things. You need the hypervisor to run the workloads. Also, you need the way to store the data. It's as important as that. And ESA gives us much more options in terms of how we can architect in the future, different devices we can use below it to make it more elegant, more efficient, maybe perhaps, and for different use cases as well. And also with the snapshots now, see, one of the things about moving data also is how do you move quickly? How do you kind of do DR? Those kind of things require a more snapshot-based kind of a building blocks as well. So this actually will help us kind of draw a kind of a ring circle around the globe, hey, you can move anywhere. And we'll also have a global snapshot catalog to see where your data is. You can get a global dashboard view of all your data, all your snapshots, and you can do compliance, and you can see where the ransomware is happening. You can see whatever you want to see. That's kind of where we're going.
Wow, global dashboard would be fantastic. I think that's something that I've thought about in the past is, if you've got all these hyperscalers that you can use with these hypervisor solutions on top of the hyperscaler, fantastic. Where's my data? What failure scenario am I experiencing now? And what are my options? If I've got 3 sites or 5 sites or something and I have a failure, I really want a dashboard that tells me what's my best location to fail over to if I've got multiple choices. So it sounds like you're building that. Yeah.
And a lot of people do like the cloud for a failover DR scenarios because, see, you don't have to pay for the compute resources all the time. You can on demand get it when you need it. So there's a lot of benefits to that model as well, if people want to choose that route. And also you don't have to manage. It's a fully managed service. All those things are really beneficial for a lot of customers. So we see DR as a very big use case as well because it just makes life simpler for customers. And it only get better with this global dashboard. See, the other thing about data is the following. VMs tend to be one place, right? They just run one place. But data is different. Data wants to be replicated to 3 different places. It wants to be everywhere. So you need a way to look at this data in a global way so that you can actually manage it in a different way. Also, you have compliance regulations. You need to kind of make sure that, okay, I need to have 3 copies. It's got to say I have 3 copies in these different places, the 3-to-1 policies. So you got to have these dashboards and compliance reports so that you can see it all and do things you want to do with it.
Yeah, so I think that the dashboard is extremely valuable, certainly in real time, but also, people underestimate the value of having a report that you can generate as an artifact for the business to show they're actually compliant.
Yeah.
So this is a great example of, we take our technical hat off for a minute. If we're being audited for a compliance requirement, right, the technical guy can point at his screen and say, look, it's green. We've got all these things. And the auditor says, yeah, whatever, give me a report.
Yeah,
so it's actually very important to be able to pull that data out in a human readable way and provide that report quickly and easily. So anyone who's worked in a complex, compliance focused environment will really value that capability.
So I call it to be audit ready, right? You want to be audit ready all the time. So I've seen a lot of people struggle with audits, and I think we want to simplify that process because it's one of those hidden costs people have, right? And we don't talk about it. Architecture, LFS, all this stuff doesn't talk about that. But I think this is also as important as anything else, is that how we make customers' life easier and produce a compliance report. But ultimately, because it is their data, they do care about the compliance and they do have regulations for it.
Yeah, so I think that dashboard, if we can go down the route of talking about ransomware and recovery and things like this, I think that dashboard and report would be very helpful as well to help customers see where they're at from an RPO and RTO perspective.
Yep.
Because if my data is here, I've got your 321 copies and they're available, I can roughly estimate what my recovery time and recovery point is going to be,
Yep.
and measure that against what my goals are. And obviously, if I'm compliant, fantastic. And if I'm not compliant, it's visual. It's right there. I can see that I'm not compliant with what I want, and you can make changes to obviously achieve a better RPO or RTO.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think reporting is very important. Looking forward to seeing how things develop in that space for sure.
Yeah, and also, like, as you know, in today's business, you can't be down ever. You have to be up all the time. So I think this DR ransomware problems are it's a really crucial business problem to solve.
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about, recently was if you've got a customer who's got regulations about where their data is in terms of being in country or out of country. You've also got considerations around, if there's an earthquake or something, you've got to be a certain distance away to consider yourself as DR. I think, a dashboard where you can see all the different regions where you could potentially replicate to, or that you have a landing zone in, and then choose, where you're going to go based on, some policies. So you define it's got to be a certain distance away, it's got to be in country, or it must be out of country, or it must be in a certain provider, or it might be, hyperscaler 1 or hyperscaler 2. You might have a commercial agreement with one, which means that's your preference. But if that's unavailable, you need to recover in the second one. I think this opens up a huge number of possibilities, because if a hyperscaler goes down, then that dashboard might go, oh, okay, we can't meet our recovery point and time objective. Would you like us to establish a point in the other hypervisor? And then, once everything's back up and running, you can potentially deprecate this one. But it gives you that, that protection even during failure scenarios. So I think this is where everything's going. I think the whole multi-cloud space is very exciting. That's why my team are really focused on that space.
Yeah, I think so too. So I met a customer who has a primary site in Florida. They have a DR site in Houston. The problem was that when there is a hurricane, both of them actually kind of got hit. So they decided to have a third option to put somewhere else, because they needed 3 copies now, because it makes sense for their business. That so if you put it in California and maybe Vegas, earthquakes are probably not going to cross that bound like that far distance. But hurricane, it can cross that bound. Like they're the same same zone in some sense, like from that angle. So basically, during one of the hurricanes, then they got hit by both places, Houston and Florida. They're like, okay, what do we do now? So that's why they've changed strategies to have a third site somewhere in the northeast, or somewhere I think Midwest.
You know what I'd really like to see? So here's something for your product team and things to discuss is, if I've got, let's say, a map in front of me, and I've got all the different regions that I can potentially go to, I'd love to get like an estimate on how long it would take for my data to get there, based on some testing. Obviously, you do a ping test and, do a data transfer test. It'd be great to see how quickly can I establish a presence for these workloads or for this recovery plan in that data center or in this one. So hurricane comes, obviously we're in Vegas when there's flooding and hurricanes and all sorts of nonsense. So imagine if you've got those 2 data centers, you got Florida and you got Houston, and there's a hurricane coming through. I could look at the dashboard and I could go, to get my data to New York or to Seattle, which one is faster, right? And then it says, actually Seattle's faster. You can get there in 12 hours, whereas New York might be 16 hours. And then go, okay, cool. Let's establish that presence.
It's interesting.
I think that would be fantastic.
But I wonder if people are willing to take that drastic step like that. I just don't know, because it is not an easy decision to suddenly, like, if you're a small company, it's fine. Maybe you can do it. If you're a large company, I don't know if that decision can be made like snap like that. I mean, it's a good feature, what you're saying. It's maybe a good feature just when you're initially planning itself, to have hey, where's my best place to go? But once you set it up, I don't know if people really are going to change their strategy like that easily, like that, just because of the small glitch. Especially if you have petabyte of data. It's not easy to move petabyte data, no matter what you say.
Yeah,
and it's nothing to do with our file system, nothing to do with anything. It's just a pipe you needed, how much money are you going to spend on this? And you have to get approvals from everybody else. So I think there's a long process for this. It's not a trivial thing. If you're a one-man shop or one woman shop, you can click a button and say, okay, I'll do something else. But large enterprises are like a little bit more, I think, kind of cagey on this. But I do like the idea that initial planning, we can recommend, hey, here's options for you.
Yeah, for sure. And like you say, it could be step 1, which is we're going to establish a DR site. Where should we go?
Yeah.
It could help with that. It could be you're already in Azure, right? So you've already chosen your provider. Let's set up a landing zone in this place because it's more efficient, or the latency is lower on average than where you are currently. So, obviously there's organizational constraints. So you're not going to, like you say, just click a button if you're a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah.
But to have the option to do it, I think is
Sure.
a fantastic.
I think I agree with that, because actually people do change. I'm not saying they will change willy-nilly, but people do change sometimes strategy, and people do have to think about this in the first place when they do the DRs, when they actually start replicating somewhere, they want to pick something. So there's could be some innovation there. I can see that we can help the customer, because there's not a lot of good choices, and we can probably provide some options saying, hey, here's the different venues for you to go choose. We can choose.
Yeah, and I think providing a dashboard with choices based on real data and saying, hey, VMware is recommending you go to this data center because of all these metrics. Right? We've assessed 20 different metrics. You might even check the availability of bare metal resources in that region and go, oh, actually, you can't go to Seattle because Seattle doesn't have enough bare metal resources.
So,
whereas New York
Josh,
does.
I want to stop you there 1 second. See, is this like, it's going to be that much challenging problem? I'm just sharing with you honestly. I'll tell you why. Which vendor is going to be okay with the VMware saying, hey, this data center is better than that one? I mean, you can say price. That's a very obvious number. But better is a very funky number, fuzzy topic. And secondly, if you ask a cloud vendor saying, what do you have free? They're not going to give you an answer to you.
No, that's true.
That is their secret sauce.
We both know that's true. Yeah.
So I'm just saying that's actually not that's not an easy problem for kind of VMware to go chase. I think what VMware can do is provide options, and okay, if some cloud vendor is really going there all the time, okay, we can say, okay, don't go there. But otherwise, we have to be more open. VMware is generally a very open company. We support a lot of ecosystems. So I don't think we'll ever kind of have that good, bad, ugly kind of thing. I think it'll be like maybe cost. Like I can see that.
For sure.
I can see the RPO distance. I can see that. I can do that kind of a very, very quantitative metrics, not qualitative. Qualitative metrics is very hard because it's very subjective.
It would have to be latency. It'd have to be bandwidth. It'd have to be, capabilities and price and things like that. It wouldn't be an opinion. It wouldn't be Josh doesn't like vendor X or something like
exactly.
that.
It's got to be very objective. Otherwise, you have lawsuits, whatever. Think about it. So I remember long ago, this kind of went me a story long ago, when VMware was doing a vVols, this is a vVols story. Long ago, when vVols was happening. And then one of the things that I asked was, one of the APIs being discussed was, hey, can we query storage at a vendor? And you tell us, what's your SLAs? Like, what's the number of nines? And I was in the meeting with the EMC folks as well. You know what the EMC guys market, they said, they had an immediate answer. They said, our marketing team will tell us to put 7 nines as a hard-coded number and return it. Because who will report lower number? It just makes no sense. And if one vendor says 7 nines, everybody's going to say 7 nines. Like, who's going to say I'm like 2 nines? So I think that I think was it was very funny, just the dialogue itself. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying the funny dialogue, because that is it's a very subjective topic,
Yeah, and everyone, even some vendors will, and I'm not a fan of this at all, but they'll guarantee, no downtime. I remember there was this marketing come out for one vendor. They said, we guarantee no downtime. And I just went, oh my God, some poor customer's going to buy that because they don't know that you can't really guarantee no downtime. But to your point, it's right. You just hard code in 7 nines and you'd forget about it. So
that's right.
Yeah,
because it becomes a marketing game, not technical game, right? So that's the issue.
Yeah, and that's why I'm a big fan of marketing teams working with the architects and the engineers and the product teams to try and get a realistic outcome. Market something that's real. Here is something we did. It's a case study. It's demonstrate something live and that's real. Because when you oversell and under-deliver, no one's happy. Vendors unhappy, customers unhappy, partners are unhappy. So, I'm a big fan of that.
I've been in many startups, right? In startups, you have to do a little upsell. You have to kind of do a little marketing push. But VMware is very engineering focused. It's a very opposite of what startups do in terms of they're very, very conservative in what they push. If they say we do these things, it'll do better than that. They don't because in the beginning I was like, we can do this. They're like we don't say those things. We have to kind of say things a little lower than what they're capable of. So I think they're trying to set the expectation for enterprise customers that look, what they deliver, VMware delivers, it's going to be good. We're not over promising anything. The culture is not there for that. It's very engineering culture, very honest culture.
Yeah, definitely working with engineers is fun because you get the truth.
Yeah, you get
Whether
the
it's an
truth.
internal conversation or whether it's a public statement, if you speak to an engineer, typically you'll get a very accurate answer that's representative of something in the real world. So,
And also the company culture overall, like, it's over the last 20 years, right? I mean, you can't suddenly change like that also. Like, so they're following the same culture, and generally they don't want to overpromise things. They try to keep it, below what it can do, so that people can, if they get more, they're excited customers, but they don't want to over deliver on the promises. That's generally what I've seen at VMware. So I'm also trying to follow the same policies.
no, absolutely, I agree with you. So, one topic I know you're very passionate about is ransomware. So, I'll give the floor to you. You can take us wherever you want to go with ransomware, and we can talk for hours if you want. But tell us about ransomware in general. What are you seeing in the market? And then let's talk about some of the things that your team is doing and VMware is doing.
Yeah. So I've been traveling the world a little bit to meet customers on ransomware. This ransomware topic particularly, it's a global problem. It's like not a unique problem to us. It's in India, it's in Europe. It's like it's everywhere, and so that challenge is because also the nature of the beast is changing. Okay, first of all, why is ransomware there at all? Like, so ransomware, the way it works is that there is a two team, team. One part of the team is software engineers. They build software. They are building software very fast. They can churn out 3 patches a day, like they wanted to. 3 new versions of virus. That's a SaaS model, software defined. Like they have their own software defined model of how they do this stuff. Very agile, very moving lightning speed. And then there is a ROI team. Their job is to find phishing candidates. They do phishing, social engineering. Their job is to find people who will pay money. Like, for example, if you do ROI analysis, it's like a very business-oriented mindset. If you find a hospital, you can see what revenue they make. And if you're down for a day, this is what happens to their business. It's very simple math. And then they'll ask, let's say, if you're down for a day, you lose about $5 million. They'll ask for $1 million. If you're a CEO, you're like, okay, I'm just pay up and move on kind of thing, right? That's the business model generally. And phishing, there are a lot of tools in the industry to do prevention. There are 3,000 security companies. They're trying to all prevent ransomware. The problem is not them. I mean, they're all very good. Still, it's leaking through. I'll tell you why it's leaking through. Because phishing. I recently got an email from my boss saying, "Hey, this is important. Click on check this. Check out this spreadsheet." I clicked on it. I am no ransomware stuff. I know this. I'm not in the business. And then I got a pop up saying it's from VMware IT. They're like, "Hey, it's a test. You failed." Okay. So a simple thing like that is how things get in. And once they get in, they also become sophisticated now. They are now signatureless. See, before they have signatures. You can scan the disk and find things. But now they become cleverer. They have deleted the signatures. They don't use any new tools. They use existing tools. They latch onto some memory somewhere, hang out there. And then they do slowly behavior, like, they change how, what they do slowly. So that requires a new way of thinking, next generation antivirus, things like that. It also requires you to analyze AI behavior. What is it doing? So all of these things, problems is fundamentally has changed how easy it is to get ransomware into your system and how easy it is to actually then start demanding money. Right. So this problem is there everywhere. Everybody now data is like your business is down. It's all digital businesses these days, right? So they found a good business model for themselves, unfortunately. And so we are in this space now where everybody's like, kind of struggling with this. In the 2 parts to this problem, prevention is a very security focused, right? Security tools, all that stuff. But once you get hit by something, then there's a recovery phase because you got to recover. And that happens to be a storage problem fundamentally. So it's become a storage problem, a big storage problem, like, to deal with this. So when I meet customers, I ask them like following question. I said, "What's your plan for recovery?" And they all actually, I think they all at this point accepted they'll get hit. Okay, nobody is questioning that topic anymore. They all accept it's gonna happen. The first question is then what is next step recovery? What I've generally heard is that people say, "Hey, I have immutable backups or snapshots." So somehow there is a feeling in the market that, some people have done a good job marketing this stuff. Some vendors, that immutability is like a magic wand. It'll fix everything. I'm like, okay, walk me through a little bit. Why? So what does immutability mean to you? Oh, what that means to them is they think it's a clean. I'm like, how does it get clean? No, it's not clean because you back up yesterday. Virus was there yesterday, all the encryption, you backed it up. Yes, immutability means you cannot delete those backups. That's just fair. Okay, that's great. But the data in it is not looking that good. So what is the next step? If you bring up these workloads, firstly, if your backup system is there, if you bring up from the backup storage system generally don't run workloads. Generally, or they can run one VM or two VMs, right? If you have 1,000 VMs, like how do you bring up all these VMs? You have to copy all the data first. You have first of all to find out which backup is good, bad, ugly. Like find something.
And that's the hard part, I think, is finding out when you've got a reliable copy of data. People underestimate this step.
Yes,
this is very difficult.
So let's say the problem with that is that you can't guarantee this is good or bad. So it's be a range. Okay, in these 3-4 days, there's this problem happen. Let's go back and look at these 3-4 days. So to do that, you need experimentation, to experiment with these backups and see what the problem is. And to do that, you must first copy all the data to a primary storage. Okay, for like let's say I'm Tuesday. Okay, I'll pick backup for Tuesday and copy all of the stuff. And that doesn't work. Okay, try Wednesday. So basically, like a long process, moving data around everywhere. Okay. And the second bigger problem is that I point out to customers is that if you bring up these workloads, they're infected. They'll reinfect your environment. It's not gone. They're right there. So basically, they're like, oh yeah, that's a problem. So they haven't really like if you dig deeper into people actually hit the problems, they'll describe to you what they have done as a workflow. Like they will first have to quarantine a compute farm by itself, which is completely isolated from anything else. It's called isolated recovery environment. That's that Gartner word. You need a quarantined environment. You got to build this stuff first, and then you got to try experiments with these different backups and see what is good, what is bad. Like you got to do all these experiments by hand, and you got to inject tools into it and dig out things you don't like think are bad, some are good. And then finally, when you're done with cleaning, you got to shut it down. You got to then take all this back and say, okay, I'm good with this, and push it back into your primary storage. So it's a long process people are following. So what we did was, we talked to all these customers across the globe the last like a couple of years ago. They told us all these problems. And we said, okay, look, this is an interesting problem. We can solve this problem in a much more elegant way. It requires many innovations. Firstly, you require an innovation where you need a storage system which can run workloads also. It can be backup and it can be primary when you need to be. Without that, if it's just a backup, then it will not work. Again, copying the data is not like you need a system which can suddenly run workloads whenever you want it to at speed. And then you also need a on-demand way to create this isolated recovery environment, like compute farm, install vSphere, brand new, and kind of make sure that nothing is there. It's all like brand new stuff, and without having to pay for it all the time. Because who wants to pay for this? Like have this compute farm just hanging around for you, waiting for you. Like nobody wants to pay for that. So you want some of that, and you want a workflow. See, look at one of my favorite companies is ServiceNow. So what do? They actually, all is about workflows. They produce workflows. So that's what we also thought about. Okay, like how do we provide these workflows to automate all of these steps customers are doing one by one? So that's what we did. So we can give your customers, here's the range of good, bad snapshots, pick them, and we can iterate fast. And then we can launch these compute farms in the cloud instantaneously, and we can quarantine the entire thing, and also launch VMs, quarantine them with different levels of quarantineness, and we inject Carbon Black and other tools into it automatically. It's all automatically. And then we analyze it and we give a report and we tell you customer what to do. And finally, when you clean it, you can say, I'm good. And you can press a button. We will take the data back to your on-prem. So that's kind of what the Datrium, like the VCDR, VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, the ransomware recovery solution does. It's a very unique in the market because what everybody's selling is immutable backups. I'm like, what does it do for you? Like that is not the solution. It is important step.
One piece. It's not the solution. Yeah.
So the next question is, what do you do after that? People have not thought through much. And then you think that, okay, if I get hit by ransomware, I will give them some money and it'll fix itself. No. The ransomware guys are very good at encrypting. They're not good at decrypting. That's not their business. They're not optimizing for that. So like if you look at the Cornelian pipeline thing, they paid money, they got the keys, they failed to recover because it's so slow. They went back to the backups and recovered from there.
So that's like the worst case scenario. You've actually paid. So you've suffered an outage, you've paid the ransom, and then you couldn't recover anyway. So you had to recover manual ways and you've lost data and all this. So that's a great example of the scenario that customers can find themselves in, even if they think paying the ransom is the best option.
Yes. So customers are looking for an answer. And so this is my 5-minute pitch. And generally customers get it. And it's easy to kind of then sell the solution because nobody has built like these workflows to actually automate this entire step one by one. And it requires technology, firstly. It's not just a piece of UI you just build. No, it's not like that. You need a file system which can run workloads, it can be a backup. You can do all these things. You also need snapshots to be at like very, very like fine grains, and you can also clone things. Then you also need a compute farm somewhere from like thin air. You got to produce compute farm, and you got to inject all these, work with all these vendors to like, Carbon Black is VMware product, right? So it's easy to work with them to kind of have a negotiation of the deal. How do we make money? Like all that stuff. So there's a lot of pieces to be fitted. And that I think is where I think VMware has, I think we've done a good job on this product. I just selling myself. I worked on it also. But customers also resonating with it. We have seen a huge growth in this business in the last couple of years. Huge. I mean, it's like literally one of the fastest, hockey stick kind of products.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
typical Silicon Valley style, like hockey stick. That's what we are seeing for this product. Because there's a demand for it, and we feel like we're obliged to kind of help customers. VMware is everywhere, so we feel like it's not a VMware problem, but we feel obliged that we should be providing solutions for our customers. By the way, it's a society problem. Ransomware is a forever problem. It's not going away. There's money to be made. So as a whole society, we gotta fight this. And the only way to fight this is you can't prevent it all the time. We must recover. Recovery is where we can fight. We can fight back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Ransomware is not a VMware problem. It's just everywhere in IT, in society. And the fact that you've got the hypervisor and that vSphere suite, just that basic virtualization layer, helps you recover. So I think that's a really good tool to make it more difficult for attackers to get into your environment.
Yep.
There's more layers you can abstract and use NSX and Carbon Black and things like that. And it's a quicker way to recover to a new environment that, like you say, can be automated and stood up very quickly. So I think it's a great way to do it. And that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of having the hypervisor sitting on the hyperscaler, because it gives you all of that stuff that you're used to, and all that value. So I think it's not only a cost benefit, and I would argue the hypervisor on the hyperscaler is also a performance benefit in a lot of cases.
And also, it looks the same as your on-prem data center. It looks the same. You can't tell the difference. So basically, that's the other beauty, is that it's a consistent experience you get. You don't have to learn new tools. And also the automation, we made it kind of easy to use, because see, you're under stress if you're going to hit by ransomware. Everybody's watching you at this point. Do you want to open a book and start reading how to make this, how to think about this stuff? No. So we kind of made it easy so that people can actually do something useful without having to read a manual, like a huge manual on this topic. Also, we have a button to say ransomware recovery testing. Like CDR testing is also there. You also want testing sometimes, right? So we also have that button to say, okay, I have a training session every 6 months, and I'm going to do a fire drill for ransomware. Okay, here's a button. You can go through the process and kind of do this run books, this workflow, stuff like that.
And that's critical. And then, well, I always say to customers, you need to have an artifact that proves what you're saying you can do that you actually have done. So the testing capability, just like SRM back in the day, used to be able to test. It's just fantastic capability that just makes IT's job easier to keep the business compliant, and maximize the chance that in the event of an actual problem, you can actually recover. So actually, you just reminded me there, you're in a high stress environment, ransomware or disaster of any kind. I remember, I won't name the company, but this company got hit recently. They put out a job advertisement, advertising they need someone to work for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week to help them recover from this hit. And I'm sure everyone listening knows who we're talking about, but that's just a great example of what happens in the real world. People are expected to work these unreasonable hours, 7 days a week, or even more than 10 hours a day. And we don't function as human beings that well working like that with, probably poor sleep and poor nutrition. IT, we're notorious for having poor nutrition. We drink a lot of energy drinks. So in these situations, we make mistakes. So being able to design something when you're not in a disaster, implement it and test it during a low stress period of time means that in that high stress environment, the chance of you screwing something up as a human being is much lower.
Also, with automation, there's less variability each time you test, right? You kind of have a consistent way to test this so that you get experience from it. Like if you do it all manually, it'll be different each time, right? So I have two different stories on this topic from what customers are told. Like I've heard two stories. I met a customer once. This is about disaster recovery. So the customer, I asked him, how is he thinking of disaster? I heard nobody say they have an awesome DR plan. Okay, nobody has said that to me ever. So this customer particularly, he was in a fire zone. Okay, it's a little bit of a fire zone. So he told me his plan, if he gets hit by disaster, he hopes he dies in it because he doesn't want to deal with it. I'm like, wow, like that's like pretty dramatic. That was one story I heard many years ago. Other story I heard recently was about ransomware. It's kind of similar but different. So I asked customer, like he said, I have a really good strategy for my ransomware recovery. I said, what is it? I was like, never heard this before. He said, I'll retire that day. So I'm saying these are like really hard problems people are trying to
I want
solve.
to know
And I think,
how old the person is who says they're going to retire the day they get hit by ransomware. If they're not close to retirement age, that's a crazy thing to think. Yeah.
But I felt sad. I mean, I think it's being a little funny, but like that's the nature of the animal. Like it's just very hard problem. And I'm thinking that the world has to build more recovery stuff. That's the only thing. And by the way, just a plug, we're going to announce some new stuff at Barcelona on this topic. So I think at Barcelona Explorer, it's in November sometime.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I think I'll get you back on and we can do a bit of a deep dive on that after the announcements because everyone loves hearing from you. And I mentioned to a couple of my colleagues and friends that you were coming on and they were all very excited. So
thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're a popular man.
Not as popular as you, Josh.
I'm definitely not the most popular person, but
widely known person, leave it that way.
Yeah, but I try to share my thoughts and help out where I can. But so we've talked about a lot about ESA, because I think ESA is such an important piece of that puzzle, and I think ESA is probably going to improve all the scenarios you just talked about with the automation and the speed of recovery and the resiliency of those recovery solutions. That's definitely a tool that people are going to use. What's next? What can you tell us about what's coming that's public? Obviously, there's some stuff coming at Barcelona. We're recording pre-Barcelona. So what do you think is next? Even if it's conceptually, what do you see in the next 12 months or 24 months in your space?
This is, I think, where VMware is a very, very conservative company. I'm not supposed to say anything. That's something where the difference between, if I was a startup company, I would tell you a lot of things, but here I think I have to it's a very conservative company. Unless we deliver something, are we close to delivering, don't talk about it kind of thing. But definitely we did a tech preview announcement for cyber secure storage, which is basically the way to how do you manage snapshots properly in ESA. Like we have a new catalog. And also how do you tie it to the ransomware recovery story together. So we're kind of offering that as a tech preview. We are going to do betas very soon. And definitely we're going to launch something next, I think, sometime, whenever. I mean, I can't say this.
Well, I'll definitely try and get on that beta and see if I can test it out and ask you a few more intelligent questions.
We're doing a very selective beta for very selective customers because we also don't want like hundreds, just want a few. Just make sure that we test the kind of the idea itself and make sure that it's working the way we expect it to work kind of thing. So it's a very focused on very few small customers. Sorry to disappoint you, but it's tech review again. I can't say any little ship. I can't say those things.
Oh, it sounds good to me. I think the dashboard you referred to and all the innovation with ESA, I think there's plenty of exciting stuff for customers to absorb. And of course, all the disaster recovery solutions, I'm planning to, do some more blogging on that in the future. So yeah, I'd love your thoughts on those blogs before I put them out. But yeah, I really appreciate your time, Sazzala. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to having you on again in the future if you can put up with my Australian accent again.
Sounds cool, man. So thanks for having me over here, and thanks for talking about the vSAN stuff and all the VMware stuff. It's very exciting. Thank you for
It's a pleasure. I love it. It's a very exciting space, and yeah, can't wait to see where things head.
Okay, let's keep in touch.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.